So what I did when I did the counter exercise is I put my counter inside my app, right? You generally don't want to do this, right? You don't want to have your code, you don't want an app component that's 1,000 lines long, right? We want to break up our code into different components. So what I want to do is make a new folder called components. And I want to make a new component called counter. Okay. So my question to you is, how do I refactor this so that the counter, instead of living inside of app.js, it has its own component?
Could you turn it into a prop?
We might have to use props. We might. But first, let's just make a component, right? Let me do the boilerplate. Okay, so I've got my counter component, and let me start it to make sure it still works. Cool. Close this. Close this. So I want this code basically to live in here, right? So just cut and paste, right? I mean, pretty self-explanatory, pretty straightforward. I just want this, whatever I have between the opening and closing fragments in my app, I can just move it into here. Okay, everybody with me? Yes, kind of, sort of, maybe no. Cool. I see a thumbs up from Z. I'll take it. So I'm going to cut this, paste it in here, and clean it up a little bit. That's fine. It's clean enough. Now, if I refresh, why? Oh, because I got to save the file. I got to turn autosave back on. I turn off autosave. Well, and never mind, it doesn't matter. Okay, so now it goes away, right? My counter's gone. So how do I get it to show up again in my app?
You import in there and then do the closing tag. So
Yep,
the
exactly.
Mhm.
So I want to import it. So if you're having trouble with imports, Visual Studio Code, if it can find the component, it will find it and it will autocomplete for you. So if I've already made my component, which I've already made my counter component, I can just start typing counter, and if it sees it, it will automatically put the right path for me. So I just hit tab and it will automatically fill out the path. The problem is if we have nested components, sometimes Visual Studio Code has a hard time finding nested components. So you may have to, if that happens, just type your string. And if I say // Visual Studio Code will automatically show me the directories I have to choose from. So if I want to import from a different folder, like if I wanted to import main for some reason, I could just go to main and hit tab and be done. But Visual Studio Code knows that I can import from assets or I can import from components. So if I do components and I can't remember if it's tab or enter. I guess, no, it's not. Well, no, that's right. So I fill out components, then I do / again. It will give me a list of all the files that I have available to import from there. So if I just hit enter, it's done. Okay. So again, like I say, start typing import and the component you want. It should autocomplete. If it doesn't, you should be able to just start with / and it'll show you a list of options where you can import from. Because importing is hard. It's hard to, file paths are confusing. It just takes a while to get used to. Save, refresh. Aw. It's not working. Because I'm a dumbass. I didn't use it. All right. There we go. Okay. I'm still doing something wrong. So let's see what I'm doing wrong. So whenever if it says this, like trying to load element tree and it just hangs here, it means you messed up somewhere. Usually this little red X will be here, meaning that there's errors in the console. So if you go into the console, and I know it's kind of gibberish at this point, but get in the habit of reading them, eventually they'll start making more sense. So here I have reference error state is not defined, and it gives me the line number. So if I look in counter.jsx, line 7, right here, I'm trying to reference state, but state doesn't exist. So state is my state, right? So how do I get, well, first of all, let me ask, who should be responsible for keeping track of a counter? Like if the count is 3, where should that 3 be? Let's say I have 2 counters. One's 3, one's 7. So I don't necessarily, oh, I'm sorry, Z, were you gonna say something?
I was gonna say, is it like you want to like in state or
I want it in state, but what I'm asking is where should my state go? Should it go in app or should it go in the counter?
in the counter?
Exactly. Yeah. We want to keep the state as low as possible, right? In our tree of components, we want to keep it as low as possible. And the app, the counter could be some app or some component that has nothing to do with the rest of the application, right? So we want to localize our data as much as possible. So I'm going to take this state declaration, take the whole thing. I'm going to take it out of my app, and I'm going to put it in my counter. Okay. Then in order to be able to use state, let me try to expand this a little bit. Will you drag? Of course not. Okay. So I need to, in order to use state, I need to import it. So I'm going to say use state. Okay, so now I have my state set to 0, and that error should go away now if I save my file. There we go. Okay, so now my counter should work as it usually does. It increases, it decreases, it resets. Okay. Question so far? Is this helpful? I hope.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is good. Yeah, thank you.
So if I have multiple counters, why would that break it?
Is it because you're console logging state there in like use state when there's no?
Yep. Thank you. That's exactly it. Cool. So now I have 3 different counters, and they're all independent of each other, right? So I can, this is kind of like the assignment where you want to keep track of different ages for different people. So if you have the state localized and I forget what they call the component, but if your state is within the component, it's going to keep track of the state for just that component. Okay. Does that make sense? So what if I had let's say there's a global state, a global counter. I don't know if I want to do that. Let's try it. So let's say we have I'll just say the big counter. Hmm. Having second thoughts about this. This is going to get too complicated. Okay, this is going to be arbitrary and totally bizarre sounding, but I want to make this as simple as possible. Let's just say that I'm weird, which is probably true, and I always want to start counting at 42. So I'm going to say const start equals 42. Okay, so I want, and we'll ignore the reset. Whenever a counter is created, I don't want it to start at 0. I want it to start at 42. All of them. So how do I pass this 142 down to all of my counters? And all of them have the same number. So the way I remembered this when I was first learning React, when I first learned React, I looked at props and I just thought, I'm never going to understand this. What's going on? So when I heard props, I thought P props, P pass. If I'm ever saying I need to pass something, then I'm going to use props. So pass props. So if I ever want to pass something from one component to another, it's always going to be via props. So if I want to send my start down to all of my counters, I'm going to say start equals start. Okay, so I'm saying I want to set up on my props whatever this variable is. Okay, so let me go to my counter and say, oh, get out of there, props. And I'm going to console log props. And just baby steps, a little bit of code and test, right? Make sure this works. So I'm going to refresh. So I have a prop that's empty, a prop that's empty, and a prop that has 42. Okay, because I've only set my prop on the first counter. So if I want it to go to all of them, I have to pass the start prop down to all of them. Okay, so I'm going to just copy this, paste, paste. Okay, so now all of them have a props object with a start property set to my 42 where I want to start. Okay. So now how would I modify my counter component so that it starts counting at 42 instead of 0?
You need to deconstruct props.
Okay, I could deconstruct props. So I could say const object equals props. And I'll move this up so it doesn't break. And what do I want to pull out?
Start.
Start. Right. Cool. So now I've got a start variable. This is where I want my counting to start. So where do I put this start variable so that it starts counting at my start instead of 0?
would it be like instead of the like the prev, you do start? Or you do,
Okay, so so this state, that's count. You're close. You're super close. You're on the right track. Look at this line. My counter starts at 0. Why does it start at 0?
because that's where you had to use state as.
Yeah, that's what I'm telling it to start. I'm saying start counting at 0. But instead of that, I want it to start at where my start variable is. So what do I need to do?
So you just pass in start instead of 0.
There you go. Exactly. Right. So this is how we're going to join props with state, right? We can say, tell our state whatever we want for our starting value, right? So if I want it to start at 42, they all start at 42. Okay. Make sense? Any questions? You want me to do another example, or you guys want me to shut up? I'm going to take your silences. You want me to shut up? Okay, so I'm going to stop there. I did. Please tell me I recorded. Okay, I did. Cool. Cool. Cool.